This is the on-road braking of the LRP engine. Here you could see I'm using the same needle settings as the on-bench idle tank braking. You could see the setting of both high and mid-range needle. Here you could see the setting of the low speed needle. These are the settings I had on the bench. Checking the temperature, ambient temperature is around 60 degrees. The first thing you do is you open up the throttle and you fully prime the system so the fuel could get into the engine, right? And then you would set the throttle back to close and start the engine up. The engine should start right up like what was done on the bench before. Same setting. Check for idle, making sure that there's no air bubbles going from the tank or the fuel line feeding the engine to maintain a good initial idle, right? You may get initial loading up of the engine running too rich, but you know, you could lean it out a little bit just to get the engine running, which I did. So I use my throttle trim on my car remote to kind of open up the throttle at idle just to keep the engine fed with the correct amount of air fuel mixture. The temperature outside was very cold that day, so I had to offset the throttle frame for it to idle perfectly. But the engine ran almost perfect for its initial braking. As I said, the leaning out sound was just because I set my throttle frame to be a little bit opened to maintain the temperature of the engine, because I'm running a 30% nitro fuel, so you want to change the setting there a little bit for breaking in this engine, right? So enjoy the video. Here you will also see me doing small amount of throttle snaps just to get the engine shunting, off power, on power, making sure that the conrod and all the internals could handle that impulse jerk, something I do. But I will not take the throttle more than quarter or on 40%, no more than 40% of its travel. You don't want to pressure the system too much so early. And you know, keep driving the car around in the closed circles or figure eights as you would normally do for any nitro braking process. And you don't want to let the car go too far away from you in case you have some issues that you have to go get the car real quick, because you don't want to damage a new engine, right? You don't want to flip the car over and let it lean out until it shuts off, right? You don't want to do that, especially on a new engine. So try to do the braking procedure in a tight spot if you have constraint on wide open areas. Here I'm doing it in my yard as an example. A lot of guys will not have a lot of space to run this, so you could do this in front of your yard, right? As long as your neighbors aren't annoyed by the sound. But I'll be doing the braking tank number 2 in a wider space, because I'm going to bring up the throttle to from half to full load, right? So I'm gonna need more space. But for the initial first tank on road, you could do that in a small space, as I'm doing here, right? So I'm not trying to bring the throttle more than 40%, just to let the engine get to its thermal stability point here, and nothing more than that. The car runs pretty well. I'm taking a lot of notes. Oh, the carburetor is able to increase the performance of the engine compared to the Spec 32 carb, the Spec 4 carb. This one here seems to run very stable. I saw that during the braking process, it was stable there as well compared to the old Spec 4. But here it's also very good, at least on tank number 1. I'm not getting any leaning out apart from my own setting on the throttle to be on the open side just to keep the temperature going. But the idle will remain the same throughout the entire tank of the, while doing this braking. There's times when I would stop the truck, right, and listen for idle, and it was always the same. The idle goes back to very low, very uniform, no rise and low pitches. All right, the only high pitch we're getting is when off the throttle from closing off the throttle, because my endpoint, as I said earlier many times, was set on the open end to keep the temperature up, right? But when the truck idles, it idles very good, right? So this, I won't say 3 needle, it's still 2 needles with the addition of the mid-range mixing screw. So there's misconception, people call it 3 needle, but the addition on this carb, and some other high performance engines, like some Nova Rossi, some Picos that has, it's actually 3 needles, right? 3 screws, but only 2 of them are needles, right? And the mid needle per se, it's actually a control volume, function screw. It only controls the volume of fuel in front of the lower speed needle, right? Before the Spec 4.1 carb was released, you did not have that function. So you had to control the high-end performance with the high needle, right? And then the low needle would have to do the function of idle and the mid-range fueling, which it was not optimized to do, right? You need, for this design, you need something in the middle to adjust the amount of volume in front of the needle. So idle is done by idle screw, feeding the carburetor is done by the main, and the high end is done by the main needle. But that transition between low speed and high speed, we didn't have good control on that with the older carburetor. Here we've managed to achieve that with this LRP Spec 4.1 carb, where we have the third screw, mixing screw, to control the amount of volume of right in front of the needle, so you could more precisely meter it into the car. So that's very good. Stay tuned. I'll be doing tank number 2 on a bigger space in the next coming video. Take care.